Hey, so I'm Artfully Anime, and I'm going to give 8 cheap tips for beginner anime colored pencil artists. So when I first started coloring with colored pencils, I would look up videos for tips on coloring with colored pencils, and I would see a lot of videos of people using things that I really couldn't afford at the time. So I wanted to make a tips video that gives beginners ways to make their anime art look better without having to spend a lot of money. And also, a lot of those videos were for realism, and I definitely don't do that. So first, there's two different types of colored pencils. There's wax-based colored pencils, and there's oil-based colored pencils. What I use are Prismacolors, Prismacolor soft cores to be exact. Those are wax core. They're very soft, very smooth. You have to sharpen them more often, which is a little annoying, but highly recommend for anime art. And then Faber-Castell is an example of oil-based, if you guys want to go that route. It's a harder wax that's, you don't have to sharpen it as often. It's better for like finer details, so I'd recommend that more for like realism and not so much anime art. So I'm using my Prismacolors right now, but I'm blending Parma Violet with Lilac, and I'm trying to show how smooth they are without anything. I'm just using the pencils and my own pressure to blend the colors and make them as opaque as possible. I highly recommend wax-based colored pencils if you guys are looking for an opaque option. When I first started doing anime art, I was using Prismacolor like I do now, and I ran out of my white, and I went to an art supply store to go get more white, but they didn't have my Prismacolor soft cores, so I ended up getting Faber-Castell, which I didn't know were oil-based, and it ended up not blending well with my colored pencils and ruining the piece, basically. So try to do your research. It's pretty important that you make sure you know what type of colored pencil you're using and what would be best for the situation. So second is line work. So like I said, I use wax-based pencils, so this just might be a me issue, but I saw that when I line my work with a lining pen, that the darker colors of colored pencil would just completely cover the line work. And if you're anything like me, like that's too much anxiety to just be covered up. So I find it easier to use a pencil like this and use a kneaded eraser just to pat it out a little bit, just so that the lead doesn't mix with your colored pencils. Or you could just erase it lightly if you only have erasers. Then lightly go in with the darker line color that you'll use, and then go in with whatever colors you're going to color the piece with lightly. And I usually work in layers when I color anyway, so I just go layer by layer, fixing the line work and the colors each time. Like, I used to line my pieces with pen, then when I'd color it, I'd get really annoyed that the lines would basically just disappear, so I would try going in afterwards with my lining pens to fix up the lines. Please don't do this. It'll absolutely destroy your lining pens, and those things aren't cheap, so you shouldn't go that route and destroy them all. Then I went the route of calligraphy pens or dip pens, which they did work better to go on top of the colored pencil, but they got clogged really easy with the wax. So I would recommend just doing the layer method with the pencils and use the colored pencils themselves to line your work. So 3 is going to be about paper. Earlier I said it's totally okay if you start off with Crayola, especially if you're a beginner on a budget, but if you do that, I'd recommend investing in paper. I use Tone Tan mixed media paper. Mixed media paper is very thick and it helps a lot without your papers bending or breaking through the paper. And I like using toned tan because I think it makes the whites on the pictures pop a lot more. Mixed media also comes in like white, toned gray, toned blue, toned black. Probably some other stuff I haven't seen, but whatever suits your style best, I'd recommend you getting into. A lot of people also recommend using Bristol. There's smooth Bristol paper and then there's vellum Bristol. The paper is also very thick, like mixed media. I've only ever seen it come in white, and honestly, I prefer to use the Bristol paper if I'm doing pieces that are like marker mixed with colored pencil. Um, but honestly, any paper that's not super porous would be the best, especially with cheaper pencils. The smoother the paper, the better the pencil is going to look, especially if it's cheaper pencils like Crayola. So 4 is going to be about swatching and picking colors. So it's hard to tell by the outside of the colored pencil what color the pencil actually is. So I recommend swatching every single color that you have. And also, before I do a piece, I swatch all the colors that I'll use next to each other and actually blend some together to see if the undertones match and if they'll work together. When I first started doing anime art, I used to take the colors so seriously. They had to match the reference like perfectly. But to get out of that habit, I started to do more colorful pieces that the colors didn't match the reference at all. And honestly, it was so much fun, and now I don't take the colors as seriously, just have fun. So, tip 5 is going to be about holding your pencil. This is a tip that a lot of people used to tell me and that I used to see in a lot of videos for like beginner tips that you'd see for colored pencil artists. And I never listened to it. But recently I actually started realizing that I was doing it. I just, for some reason, wasn't thinking that I was. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it's definitely helped me a lot. So on that first swatch there, I held the pencil farther back, and that helped me get a more even coat on the swatch. And then the second one, I held the pencil closer to the front, which usually gives you more pressure so that the color can be more opaque. But generally, I like to hold the pencil farther back and then work in layers. So I'll put pressure more and more as I put more and more layers, and that helps you get a smoother finish usually. So you can see that this swatch with the layers is a lot smoother than the other. So that brings me to tip 6, which is working in layers. Like I said before, I strongly prefer to work in layers. I'll put lightest pressure first and then work my way up with more pressure, blending every color that I need in that area as I go, which leads to smoother colors and smoother blending. Back when I first started my anime art, I would start off with a lot of pressure in the beginning because I wanted the colors to look more opaque, but that actually makes it a lot harder to blend smoothly. Like, making two colors blend together like that is not easy at all. You've already placed so much color and so much strain on the paper that placing any color on top of another is almost impossible. So you should work slow, work in layers, hold the pencil farther back and press very lightly, and then as you go, add more and more layers and press a little harder each time. Make sure that you're blending the colors together as you go. This is a lot more time consuming, but you could tell the difference immediately. This one's a lot more smooth and this one has a lot harsh. So tip number 7 is going to be about keeping your pencils nice and sharp. Honestly, this is something that I think is a little bit more important for people who are doing realism or a lot of pieces with fine detail on it. Not as much for anime art, but for beginners, I think it's really important that you can get as detailed and like as close to the lines as you can, as precise as possible. And you can't really do that with a dull pencil, so keeping your pencil sharp is very important for beginners. This also kind of relates back to my first tip about wax-based and oil-based colored pencils. It's important for you to realize that wax-based colored pencils really need to be sharpened a lot more often than oil-based colored pencils. So typically you'll run through the pencils a lot quicker, but that's the price you kind of gotta pay for smoother, more blendable colors. But as you can see, I colored one heart with a dull pencil and one with a sharper pencil. It's just harder to stay on the lines with a dull pencil, whereas a sharp one, it's easy. Tip 8 is do not use blending pencils. I used to use a colorless pencil, which is a blending pencil from Prismacolor, and I thought it was helping me. And honestly, in some ways it was. I just wasn't really understanding the importance of layering. But it has your colors get really patchy and really dull looking. And I think blending pencils, they could be a little helpful very early on, but you're not going to get bright and vibrant colors the same way that you will from layering. There's a lot of different ways that you could blend colored pencils, but the cheapest and most efficient way is just to layer. Like, it takes a long time, and I know it can get a little frustrating and time consuming, but honestly, in the long run, it's a lot better. You won't have to spend extra money on a pencil that's just going to dull out your colors and make them look patchy. And the more layers you do, the more patchy it'll look. It's just not the best way to go about it. Layering is definitely the best way. I know that I was really impatient early on and that I really didn't want to layer because it would make my pieces take like twice as long, but you can really see how much I've improved with my layering techniques over time. Some people also use solvent or paint thinner to blend their stuff, but that's also expensive. But you can see on the right, the blending pencil really dulled out the colors, whereas on the left, I just layered and it's bright and vibrant and blended well. So those are my 8 tips for very early on beginners. This isn't meant for people who have already been doing anime art for a while. This is very early on beginners. So if you liked this video, you could definitely subscribe and follow me on TikTok because that's where I post my videos of my art pieces. And thank you. I hope you enjoyed.